I never thought saving a life would destroy mine. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March when they wheeled him in, the kind of cold, wet night that makes everything in the ER smell like disinfectant and desperation. I remember because I'd been staring at the clock, counting down the hours until my shift ended, until I could go home and pretend I was a person instead of just a body in scrubs. 8 years. That's how long I'd been doing this. 8 years of learning how to care without feeling, how to hold someone's hand while their heart stopped and still make it home in time to feed my cat. My mom used to say I had the biggest heart of anyone she knew. She died in a hospital like this one. After that, I stopped believing hearts mattered much at all. But then, he came in. Room 347, cardiac arrest, mid-60s. No ID, no wallet, no wedding ring. Just a man in a torn designer suit, the kind you don't notice is expensive until you look close. Unconscious and dying on a gurney while the attending physician shook his head. Probably homeless. Stabilize him and call county. I should have listened. Should have checked his vitals, started the IV, moved on to the next crisis. That's the job. That's survival. But his hands stopped me. They were rough, calloused, like he'd spent years working with them. But his nails were clean, manicured. And on his left wrist, barely visible under the harsh fluorescent lights, was the pale outline of a watch. Not a Timex, something that cost more than my car. I don't know why it mattered. Maybe I was just tired of watching people disappear. Maybe I'd finally hit the limit of how much loss one person can absorb before they shatter. Either way, I stayed. I fought for him when no one else would. I sat by his bed during my break, held his hand, and whispered, "You're not alone." I don't know if he could hear me. I don't even know if I was talking to him or to myself. 3 days later, he opened his eyes. I smiled, exhausted and relieved. "Welcome back." He stared at me for a long time. Then he whispered, "You saved me." That's when everything shattered. Because the man in room 347 wasn't homeless. He wasn't John Doe. He was Julian Cross, billionaire, CEO, the man whose face had been on the cover of Forbes just last month. The man whose private jet had crashed into the Atlantic 2 weeks earlier, killing everyone on board. The man the entire world thought was dead. I Googled him that night, hands shaking as I scrolled through article after article, tributes, obituaries, investigative pieces about his empire, his enemies, the Fortune 500 companies that would collapse without him. And then I saw it, a photo of the wreckage, bodies recovered, his name on the list of the deceased. But he wasn't dead. He was in room 347, staring at me like I was the only person left on Earth. And the next morning, when I walked out to my car, there was a black SUV parked across the street, tinted windows, engine running, watching. That's when I realized saving Julian Cross didn't just mean saving a patient. It meant stepping into a world where people don't survive plane crashes by accident, where billionaires fake their own deaths because something worse than death is chasing them. And now I'm in too deep to run. This is the story of what happens when you save someone you were never supposed to meet. When you stumble into secrets powerful enough to bury you, when you realize the person you saved isn't the victim, he is the target. And so are you. It's about the invisible people who keep the world running, the lives we save without knowing their names, and the moment you have to choose, stay silent and survive, or speak up and risk everything. If you've ever felt like you don't matter, like you're just a cog in a machine, just going through the motions, just waiting for proof that your life means something, then you need to hear what happened next. Because 3 weeks after I saved Julian Cross, my apartment was ransacked. 5 weeks later, my best friend stopped returning my calls. And 2 months later, I found an envelope on my doorstep with a single photograph inside. It was a picture of my mother, taken the day before she died. Hit that like button if you believe some secrets are worth dying for. Drop a comment telling me, would you have saved him knowing what it would cost? And subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Trust me, you have no idea how deep this goes. I thought I was saving him, but maybe, just maybe, he was the only person who could save me from disappearing completely. I'd stopped believing in coincidences the same year I stopped believing in God, right around the time they handed me my mother's belongings in a plastic hospital bag. But standing in room 347 at 3 in the morning, watching Julian Cross's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision, I wondered if the universe was finally sending me a sign, or a warning. The attending physician, Dr. Reeves, had already moved on to the drunk driver in room 349. Waste of resources, he'd muttered about my John Doe patient, which is hospital speak for, let him die quietly so we can use the bed for someone who matters. But I couldn't stop staring at those hands. Rough and calloused, yes, but the cuticles were perfect. The kind of perfect that costs $200 at some upscale salon where they serve you champagne while they buff your nails. I'd seen enough homeless patients to know the difference. Real poverty leaves marks that expensive lotion can't hide. My shift supervisor, Karen, caught me lingering by his bedside during my 15-minute break. "Emma," she said, her voice sharp with exhaustion, "we talked about this. You can't save them all." She meant it kindly. Karen knew about my mom, knew that I'd worked a double shift the day she coded, that I'd been in the cafeteria buying coffee when the crash cart was called, that I'd run up 6 flights of stairs and arrived just in time to watch them pull a sheet over her face. "I know," I told Karen. "I'm just finishing his vitals." But that was a lie. I was looking for answers. The torn suit jacket hung on the back of a chair. Armani, I discovered when I checked the label. The fabric was mud-stained and ripped at the shoulder, but the stitching was immaculate. $1,200 craftsmanship. His shoes, kicked off by the paramedics, were handmade Italian leather, worn at the heels but recently polished. Everything about him screamed contradiction. Wealth and violence, care and chaos, someone who'd been running and someone who'd been caught. I pulled up a chair and sat beside him, my fingers finding his pulse point out of habit. Strong and steady now. We'd shocked him twice, pumped him full of epinephrine, breathed life back into lungs that had decided they were done. Modern medicine is just controlled violence. We beat death back with electricity and chemicals and sheer stubborn refusal to let go. "Who are you?" I whispered. His eyelids twitched but didn't open. Somewhere in the hospital, a code was being called. Somewhere, another family was gathering in a waiting room, holding paper cups of terrible coffee and making promises to God they wouldn't keep. Somewhere, life was ending and beginning, and grinding forward with brutal indifference. But in room 347, time felt suspended. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for Karen to cover for me. Long enough for the night shift to blur into that strange pre-dawn space where everything feels possible and nothing feels real. Long enough to memorize the angles of his face, the silver stubble, the scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw clenched even in unconsciousness, like he was fighting something in his dreams. "You're not alone," I told him, squeezing his hand gently. It was the same thing I'd wished someone had said to my mother, the same thing no one had said to me. His fingers twitched in response, just once, but it was enough. Julian Cross opened his eyes on Thursday morning, exactly 72 hours after they'd pronounced him stable enough to breathe without the ventilator. I was changing his IV bag when it happened. No dramatic music, no stirring speech, just his eyes snapping open like he'd been awake the whole time, watching from behind closed lids. We stared at each other for a long moment. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds over the ocean, intelligent, assessing. Nothing like the grateful confusion you usually see in cardiac arrest survivors. He looked at me the way a chess player studies the board before making the killing move. "Welcome back," I managed, my voice cracking slightly. He didn't respond immediately. His gaze traveled around the room, taking inventory. The monitors, the IV line, the locked door, the single window with its view of the parking lot. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough from the intubation tube. "How long?" "3 days. You're lucky to be alive." Luck. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Something in his tone made my skin prickle. I busied myself checking his vitals, professional distance snapping back into place like armor. Blood pressure elevated but stable, heart rate steady, oxygen saturation good. All the numbers that said he'd survive, even if he didn't particularly want to. "Do you remember what happened?" I asked, pulling out my pen light to check his pupillary response. "No." The lie was smooth, practiced. "Where am I?" "Mercy General. You were brought in Tuesday night. Cardiac arrest. No identification, so we've had you listed as John Doe." I paused, watching his face for recognition. Nothing. "Do you know your name?" Another calculated pause. Then, Daniel Morrison. I wrote it down, even though I didn't believe him. Something about the way he'd hesitated, like he was selecting a name from a mental filing cabinet rather than remembering his own identity. But patients lie all the time, about drug use, about domestic violence, about how many pills they took or who gave them that black eye. It wasn't my job to interrogate. It was my job to keep them alive. "Mr. Morrison, you're very fortunate. Most people don't survive what you went through." I kept my voice gentle, professional. "Is there anyone we can call for you? Family? Friends?" "No." Immediate. Definitive. There's no one. I knew that kind of alone. The kind where, even if there were people, you couldn't risk reaching for them. The kind where isolation was safer than connection, where disappearing was easier than explaining. "Well," I said, injecting false brightness into my tone, "you've got me for now. I'm Emma Chen. I'll be your nurse until the end of my shift." "Emma." He repeated my name like he was memorizing it, like it mattered. "You saved my life." "The doctors saved your life. No." His hand shot out, surprisingly fast for someone who'd been near death 3 days ago, and caught my wrist. Not hard, but firm enough to stop me from pulling away. "You. I remember your voice. You told me I wasn't alone." Heat flooded my face. Had he been conscious, even partially aware during those hours I'd spent beside his bed, talking to him like a confessor, telling him things I'd never told anyone? The thought made me want to run from the room. "You needed someone," I said quietly. "That's all." "And what do you need, Emma Chen?" The question hung in the air between us, dangerous and intimate. I pulled my wrist free gently, professionally, putting the necessary distance between nurse and patient back in place. "I need you to rest," I told him. "Doctor will be by in an hour to evaluate you." I was halfway to the door when he spoke again. "Emma, thank you for staying." I didn't turn around, didn't trust myself to, just nodded and walked out, my heart hammering against my ribs in a rhythm that had nothing to do with professional concern and everything to do with the way he'd looked at me, like I was the only real thing in a world made of lies. I Googled him during my lunch break, sitting in my car in the parking garage with a soggy tuna sandwich I had no intention of eating. Daniel Morrison, cardiac arrest, Boston, brought up nothing useful. A few obituaries, a LinkedIn profile for a middle school teacher in Vermont, but nothing that matched the man in room 347. So I tried something else. I searched for expensive watches, cross-referencing the tan line I'd noticed on his wrist. Patek Philippe, Rolex, Audemars Piguet, the kind of timepieces that cost more than a year of my salary, the kind that got insured separately, that had serial numbers and provenance papers, that were mentioned specifically in wills. Then I saw it. A photo in a Forbes article from 6 weeks ago. Julian Cross, the billionaire who built an empire on risk. He was wearing a navy suit, standing in front of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, and on his left wrist was a watch that matched the tan line perfectly. Same face, same scar above the eyebrow, same storm gray eyes that looked like they could calculate your net worth and your deepnesses in a single glance. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. Julian Cross, real estate mogul, tech investor, net worth estimated at $18 billion. And according to every news outlet in the country, he died 2 weeks ago when his private jet went down over the Atlantic. They'd recovered bodies, held a memorial service. His company's stock had tanked, then recovered when his appointed successors took over. The world had moved on. Except he wasn't dead. He was in room 347, calling himself Daniel Morrison and pretending he didn't remember his own name. I clicked through article after article, my sandwich forgotten. The plane crash had happened on March 15th, departing from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, heading to London. 6 people on board: Julian Cross, his pilot, his personal assistant, 2 executives from his company, and a woman identified only as a companion. The wreckage had been found 300 miles offshore. The bodies had been identified through dental records and DNA. But bodies can be misidentified. DNA can be planted. And billionaires who want to disappear have resources that make the impossible routine. I found an interview he'd done on CNBC 2 months before the crash. The interviewer asked about his greatest fear, and Julian had smiled that same cold smile I'd seen in room 347. Being predictable, he'd said. The moment you become predictable, you become a target. A target for what? Or whom? I scrolled through the conspiracy theories that had bloomed in the crash's aftermath. Some claimed it was corporate sabotage, rivals eliminating competition. Others suggested government involvement. Julian had been investigated multiple times for everything from insider trading to tax evasion, but nothing ever stuck. A few wild theories claimed he'd faked his death to escape creditors, though $18 billion seemed like enough to pay off anyone. None of it explained why he'd ended up in a Boston ER with no identification, no security detail, and a torn Armani suit. My phone buzzed. A text from Karen. Dr. Reeves wants to discharge your John Doe tomorrow. County Hospital is sending transport. My stomach dropped. If Julian Cross went to county, he'd be fingerprinting, properly identified, and his death would be exposed within hours. And if someone had tried to kill him once, if that plane crash wasn't an accident, then revealing his survival would paint a target on his back all over again. And on mine, if anyone found out I knew. I sat in my car for a long time, watching hospital staff come and go, wondering what kind of person fakes their own death so thoroughly that even their own family believes it. Wondering what he was running from. Wondering why, out of all the hospitals in Boston, he'd ended up in mine. And wondering why I cared. Because I did care. Against every survival instinct I'd developed over 8 years of watching people die, against every wall I'd built after my mother's death, against all logic and reason, I cared what happened to the stranger in room 347. Maybe because he'd called himself Daniel Morrison, a name that meant nothing, when he could have called himself anything. Maybe because when he'd grabbed my wrist, his grip had been desperate, like I was the only anchor keeping him from drifting away completely. Maybe because I recognized the look in his eyes, the look of someone who'd lost everything and was trying to figure out how to keep breathing anyway. Or maybe I was just tired of being numb. I walked back into the hospital, tossed my uneaten sandwich in the trash, and made a decision that would either save his life or destroy mine, possibly both. Would you risk everything to save someone you barely know, knowing the truth could destroy you both? I waited until my shift ended at 11 p.m., when the hospital corridors emptied, and the only sound was the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft shuffle of night nurses making their rounds. I'd spent 6 hours rehearsing what I'd say to him, how I'd confront the lie without making him shut down completely. But when I finally stood outside room 347, my carefully prepared speech evaporated. He was awake, sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the parking lot with an intensity that suggested he was memorizing escape routes rather than admiring the view. He didn't look surprised when I entered, didn't even turn his head. "Emma Chen," he said quietly, "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." So much for subtlety. I closed the door behind me, checked the hallway to make sure we were alone, and leaned against the wall with my arms crossed. Professional distance. Safe distance. "Julian Cross died 2 weeks ago," I said. "I watched the funeral on CNN. Very touching. Your sister cried." Now he turned to look at me, and something flickered in those gray eyes. Pain, maybe? Regret? Or just calculation, figuring out how much truth he needed to trade for my silence. "I don't have a sister," he said. "That was my half-brother's wife. She always did love a good performance." Why? The question came out harsher than I'd intended. Why fake your death? Why end up here? In my ER? In my... I stopped myself before saying my life, because that was too much truth for a moment that required caution. Julian studied me for a long time. Then he reached for the water cup on his bedside table, took a slow sip, and said, "Because staying alive was killing me." It was such an absurd statement that I almost laughed. Almost. But there was something in his voice, something raw and desperate, that killed the humor before it could form. "Someone tried to kill me," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Someone close. Close enough to know my schedule, my security protocols, my blind spots. The plane crash was meant to look like an accident, mechanical failure. No survivors, no investigation beyond the standard NTSB report. But you weren't on the plane." "No," a bitter smile. "I was supposed to be. Had my seat reserved, my luggage loaded. But 3 hours before takeoff, I got a message from someone I trusted. Someone who warned me that if I got on that plane, I wouldn't get off alive." "Who?" He shook his head. "I can't tell you that. The less you know, the safer you are." "I think we're past that point," I said, pushing off the wall and moving closer to his bed. "You're being discharged tomorrow. County hospital. They'll fingerprint you, run your DNA, and within 24 hours, everyone will know Julian Cross is alive, including whoever tried to kill you." His jaw tightened. "Then I'll disappear before they transfer me." "With what identification? What money? You can barely walk to the bathroom without assistance." I hated how sharp my voice sounded, how much it revealed about my frustration, about my fear. "You need help." "And you're volunteering?" Skepticism and something else, hope, maybe, colored his tone. "Why? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "No," I agreed, "I don't." But that was a lie. I did owe him something, though I couldn't quite articulate what. Maybe I owed him the chance I hadn't given my mother, the chance to be seen, to be saved, to matter to someone when the world had decided you were expendable. Maybe I owed him the thing I needed most myself, proof that caring about someone, really caring, didn't always end in a plastic bag of personal belongings and a funeral I couldn't afford to attend. "They'll fire me," I said, thinking out loud. "If they find out I helped you, probably arrest me for obstruction of justice or something. I'll lose my license, my job, everything I've worked for." "Then don't." Julian's voice was gentle now, almost kind. "Walk away, Emma. Forget you ever saw me. Let me disappear." I should have. God knows I should have. But I thought about the black SUV I'd noticed in the parking garage that morning, the one with tinted windows that had been there when I'd arrived at 6 a.m. and was still there when I'd left for lunch. I thought about how Julian's hands had trembled when he'd reached for that water cup, how his eyes had tracked every shadow in the hallway, how he'd positioned himself in the bed with his back to the wall and a clear view of the door. I thought about what it meant to be so afraid that you'd rather be dead than discoverable. "I have a plan," I heard myself say. but you have to trust me." "Trust?" He repeated the word like it was foreign language. "That's a lot to ask from a stranger." "You trusted me to save your life 3 days ago." "I didn't have a choice then." "You don't have one now either." We stared at each other across the narrow hospital room, two people with too many secrets and not enough options. Finally, Julian nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Tell me your plan." And just like that, I became an accomplice to a dead man's resurrection. My apartment smelled like cat litter and old takeout when I finally got home at 1 a.m. Miso, my tabby, wound between my legs, meowing accusatorily about the empty food bowl. I fed her, then stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at my phone and the series of calls I needed to make that would change everything. The plan was simple in theory, catastrophic in execution. I would call in sick tomorrow, food poisoning, something believable. Karen would cover my shift, grumbling but not suspicious. During the night, Julian would walk out of the hospital. Not run, not rush, just walk out like any other patient who decided to leave AMA, against medical advice. It happened all the time, especially with unidentified patients who didn't want to be found. He'd need clothes. The torn Armani suit was evidence, logged and bagged. I'd bring him something of my dad's. Before the divorce, before he'd disappeared into a new life in California with a new family who didn't include me. The clothes were still in a box in my closet, tags still on some of them, gifts he'd never lived with me long enough to wear. Funny how the people who abandon you still leave pieces of themselves behind. Julian would need money. I had $3,000 in my emergency fund, money I'd been saving for a security deposit on a better apartment, for a vacation I'd never take, for a future that always felt hypothetical. It was enough for a few weeks of cheap motels and bus tickets. Enough to disappear, at least temporarily. And then what? I'd asked him that, back in room 347, after we'd hammered out the logistics. Then what happens when the money runs out and you're still running? He looked at me with those storm gray eyes and said, "Then I figure out who wants me dead and why, and I make sure they can't try again." It should have sounded like a movie plot, dramatic, unbelievable. But the way he'd said it, tired, resigned, like he'd already wargamed every scenario and knew most of them ended with his body in an unmarked grave, made it feel horribly real. I sat on my couch with Miso purring in my lap and pulled up the conspiracy theory forums I'd been reading earlier. The rabbit hole went deeper than I'd thought. Someone claiming to be a former employee of Cross Industries had posted that Julian had been investigating financial irregularities in his own company, discrepancies that suggested someone was embezzling hundreds of millions of dollars. The post had been deleted within hours, but not before dozens of people had screenshot and reposted it. Another thread claimed Julian had been working with federal investigators, preparing to testify about corruption that reached into state government, possibly higher. The poster had been vague on details, but specific enough to feel credible. A third theory, more outlandish, suggested Julian had discovered his company's technology was being used for illegal surveillance, and he threatened to go public. That post had been downvoted into oblivion, dismissed as paranoid fantasy. But what if it wasn't? What if all of it was true? The embezzlement, the corruption, the surveillance? What if Julian Cross had been killed not by one enemy, but by a coalition of them, people who'd lose billions, or their freedom, or their power if he kept breathing? My phone buzzed. Unknown number. My finger hovered over the decline button, but something made me answer. Emma Chen? The voice was male, professional, vaguely threatening in its politeness. Who is this? A friend. I'm calling to give you some advice. A pause, long enough to let fear creep in. The patient in room 347, John Doe. He's not your concern. My blood went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, and I'm telling you, for your own safety, to forget about him. He's dangerous. People around him tend to end up dead. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you, there's a difference. Another pause. You seem like a good person, Emma. You take care of your mother's medical bills, even though she's been gone 2 years. You volunteer at the free clinic on weekends. You don't deserve to get caught up in something that has nothing to do with you. The mention of my mother stopped my breath. They'd been watching me, researching me, building a file on Emma Chen, unremarkable ER nurse, in case I became a problem. Stay away from room 347, the voice continued. Go to work, do your job, forget the man ever existed. That's how you survive this. The line went dead. I sat there shaking. Miso jumped off my lap with an annoyed chirp. They knew. Whoever had tried to kill Julian knew he was alive and knew I'd been helping him, which meant we were out of time. I grabbed my keys, didn't bother changing out of my scrubs, and drove back to Mercy General through empty streets. I ran every red light. I think I might have been crying, though I didn't realize it until I parked and saw my face in the rearview mirror, mascara streaked, eyes wild, looking like someone who'd finally cracked under pressure. Maybe I had. When I burst into room 347, Julian was already standing, dressed in his torn suit, ready to run. They called you, too, he said. Not a question. Because this is what they do. They find leverage, they apply pressure, they make people too afraid to help. He looked at me carefully. Are you too afraid? I should have said yes. Should have told him I couldn't do this, that I had too much to lose, that I was sorry, but he was on his own. Instead, I pulled the box of my father's clothes from the bag I'd brought and said, "Get dressed. We're leaving. Now." When someone threatens everything you love to make you abandon what's right, do you surrender or do you fight? We walked out of Mercy General like we owned the place. Julian in my father's old khakis and a Patriots hoodie that hung loose on his frame. Me in my scrubs with a surgical mask pulled up over my face. Just a nurse helping a patient to their car. Nothing to see, nothing to remember. But my heart was hammering so hard, I thought security might hear it from across the lobby. The black SUV was still in the parking garage. 3rd level, southeast corner, engine running. I didn't point it out to Julian, but from the way his hand tightened on my elbow, he'd already seen it. "Keep walking," he murmured. "Don't look, don't run." We made it to my car, a beat-up Honda Civic with a temperamental starter and a passenger door that stuck. Not exactly the getaway vehicle you'd choose if you were fleeing from billionaire assassins, but it was what I had. The engine turned over on the second try, and I pulled out of the parking spot with careful normalcy, fighting every instinct that screamed at me to floor it. The SUV didn't follow, not immediately, but as I turned onto Commonwealth Avenue, I caught a glimpse of headlights in my rearview mirror, staying exactly 3 cars back. Professional surveillance, the kind that knows how to be invisible until they want you to know they're watching. "They're behind us," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know." Julian had twisted in his seat, tracking them through the side mirror. "Take the next right, then the second left. Don't signal." I followed his directions, winding through Brookline's residential streets, past brownstones with their warm kitchen lights, and the kind of ordinary evening lives that suddenly seemed impossibly precious. The headlights stayed with us, patient and inevitable. "They're not trying to catch us," Julian said quietly. "They're hurting us." Hurting us where? Somewhere with no witnesses. The realization hit like ice water. They weren't going to confront us in a hospital parking garage or a residential neighborhood. They were waiting for the right moment. The empty street, the dark intersection, the place where an accident wouldn't raise questions. What do we do? My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Julian was silent for a moment, thinking. Then, "How attached are you to this car?" 20 minutes later, we were standing in the Boston Common parking garage, watching my Honda disappear around a corner with someone else at the wheel. Julian had made 2 phone calls, one to arrange the car swap, another to someone he called an old friend who owes me. I didn't ask questions, didn't want to know how a dead billionaire still had access to resources that could make a black SUV lose our tail in under 30 minutes. Our new vehicle was a nondescript gray Ford sedan with Massachusetts plates and a rental agreement in a name I didn't recognize. Julian drove, navigating through Boston's tangled streets with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. "Where are we headed?" I asked finally, watching the city lights blur past. "New Hampshire. I have a place there. No one knows about it. Not my family, not my company, not even—" He stopped himself. "No one. Not even who?" "My wife." The word came out bitter. Ex-wife, though the divorce was never finalized, technically. Hard to divorce a dead man. I'd read about Melissa Cross in the Forbes article. Socialite, philanthropist, 30 years younger than Julian, and beautiful in that cold, calculated way that makes men stupid. They'd married 5 years ago in a ceremony that made the cover of Town and Country. She'd cried at his funeral, the photos showed. Designer black dress, perfect makeup, grief that looked camera-ready. "You think she was involved?" I asked carefully. "I think Melissa has always been very good at being wherever the money is." Julian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "And very good at making sure no one else gets it." We drove in silence for a while, leaving Boston behind, heading north into darkness. The highway was empty this time of night, just trucks and the occasional car full of college kids heading home from bars. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 2 fugitives were racing past them toward an uncertain future. "Why did you marry her?" I asked, then immediately regretted it. Too personal, too intimate. But Julian didn't seem bothered. "Because I was lonely," he said simply. "Because building an empire is easier than building a life. Because she was beautiful and charming and told me everything I wanted to hear." A pause. "Because I was a fool." I thought about my own history of poor choices. The boyfriend who'd left when my mother got sick, the friends who drifted away when I couldn't afford to go out anymore, the years I'd spent confusing being alone with being independent. Maybe we weren't so different, Julian and I. Just 2 people who'd learned that trusting the wrong person could cost you everything. "Where did you grow up?" I asked, trying to steer us toward safer territory. "Brooklyn, East New York. My mom cleaned houses. My dad drove a cab before he took off when I was 8. Julian smiled slightly. "Not exactly the biography Forbes likes to print. They prefer the version where I pulled myself up by my bootstraps through sheer determination and genius. The truth is messier. I stole my first capital from a loan shark, lied on my first business application, and made my first million through a real estate deal that was probably illegal." "And now someone's trying to kill you for it?" "No." His smile faded. "Now someone's trying to kill me because I tried to fix it. Because I spent 20 years building an empire on compromises and gray areas, and then I woke up one day and realized I'd become the kind of man I'd sworn I'd never be. So I started digging, started auditing, started asking questions that made powerful people nervous. And they decided to eliminate the problem? Efficiently and permanently." Julian glanced at me, his expression unreadable in the dashboard lights. "Which brings us back to the question you've been too polite to ask. Why should you help me? I'm not a good person, Emma. I've done things, built my fortune on things that would keep you up at night if you knew the details." "Everyone's done things," I said quietly, thinking about my mother's last days, the morphine I'd snuck her when the pain got too bad, the doctor's orders I'd ignored, the line between mercy and murder that I'd walked without permission. The question isn't whether you're perfect, it's whether you're trying to be better. Julian was quiet for a long time. Then, "I don't know if I am. Trying to be better, I mean. Maybe I'm just trying to survive." "That's a start," I told him. We crossed into New Hampshire just after 3 a.m., the highway giving way to dark country roads lined with pine trees. Julian turned off onto an unmarked dirt road, the sedan bouncing over potholes and roots, headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. After what felt like miles of nothing, a small cabin materialized from the shadows, wood-sided, single-story, with a porch that sagged slightly and windows that reflected our headlights like dead eyes. "Home sweet home," Julian said without humor. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. One bedroom, a bathroom with ancient plumbing, a kitchen with a wood stove, and a table that had seen better decades. No television, no internet, nothing that could be traced or tracked. It was the kind of place you'd go to disappear, and judging by the dust on the furniture, Julian hadn't been here in years. "There's food in the cellar," he said, moving through the space with practiced efficiency, checking windows, testing locks. "Canned goods, water, enough to last a few weeks if we're careful. Firewood out back, no neighbors for 3 miles in any direction." I stood in the middle of the small living room, suddenly aware of what I'd done. I had abandoned my job, my apartment, my cat. God, miso. I'd have to ask my neighbor to feed her. My entire life to help a man I barely knew hide in the wilderness. This was insanity. This was career suicide. This was Emma. Julian was standing in front of me, his hands on my shoulders, forcing me to look at him. "Breathe. You're hyperventilating." I hadn't realized, but now that he'd said it, I could feel it. The tight panic in my chest, the way the room was tilting, the crushing weight of every decision I'd made in the last 12 hours, pressing down until I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't... "Look at me," Julian commanded, his voice steady and sure. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. You're okay. You're safe." But I wasn't safe. Neither of us was. And the worst part was that I'd chosen this, had walked into this nightmare with my eyes open, driven by some broken need to save someone, anyone, even if it meant destroying myself in the process. "I can't do this," I heard myself say. "I can't. I need to go back. I need to..." "You can't go back." Julian's voice was gentle but firm. "They know you helped me. The moment you walk into your apartment, they'll be waiting. Your best chance, our best chance, is to stay here until I can figure out who's behind this and how to stop them." "And how long will that take?" He didn't answer, didn't need to. We both knew the truth. It could take days, weeks, months. It could take forever. Or it could end tomorrow, with both of us dead in a cabin in the woods, another mystery that would never be solved. I sank onto the ancient couch, feeling the springs dig into my back, and put my head in my hands. Julian sat beside me, careful to leave space between us. And for a long time, we just sat there in the darkness, two strangers who'd become each other's only hope. "Tell me about your mother," he said finally. And because I had nothing left to lose, I did. I told Julian about my mother's diagnosis, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, discovered too late, treated too aggressively, killing her almost as fast as the disease itself. I told him about the medical bills that crushed us, the insurance company that denied her experimental treatment, the fundraiser that raised barely enough to cover one round of chemo. I told him about the hospital room that became her world, the view of the parking lot she stared at for 6 months, the way she'd apologized for being sick like it was something she'd chosen. And I told him about the end. The morphine drip I'd adjusted without authorization, the way I'd held her hand and whispered that it was okay to let go, the moment her breathing stopped and the machine started screaming, and I just stood there, relieved it was finally over, relieved I could stop watching her suffer, relieved and immediately drowning in guilt that I'd felt relief at all. Julian listened without interrupting, without offering platitudes or empty comfort. When I finally stopped talking, he said, "You gave her mercy. That's not something to feel guilty about." The hospital board didn't see it that way. They investigated, called it a potential ethics violation. I was cleared, technically, but I swallowed hard. But everyone knew. The looks I got in the hallways, the whispers, that's the nurse who helped her mother die. Like I was a murderer instead of a daughter who couldn't watch her suffer anymore. "Is that why you transferred to the ER, away from oncology?" I nodded. ER patients die fast or survive. There's no slow torture, no watching someone waste away over months while their family goes bankrupt trying to save them. It's cleaner. Except it's not. Julian's voice was quiet. "Is it? Because you still see her in every patient, still try to save everyone to make up for the one person you couldn't save. The accuracy of it stole my breath. I'd never articulated it to myself, never let myself examine why I worked doubles, why I fought for the patients everyone else had written off, why I'd risked everything to save a stranger who should have meant nothing to me. "You saved me because I was her," Julian said. "Another person the system had decided wasn't worth the effort. Another inconvenience to be transferred and forgotten." That's not. But I stopped, because it was. At least partly. I'd seen my mother in that hospital bed, had projected my guilt and my rage and my desperate need for a different ending onto a man I didn't know. And now we were both paying the price. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this, that I—" "Don't." Julian cut me off, his tone sharp. "Don't apologize for saving my life. Don't apologize for being human." He stood, moved to the window, stared out at the darkness beyond. "I spent 20 years building an empire and forgetting how to be human, forgetting that people matter more than profit margins, that loyalty means something, that there are lines you don't cross no matter how much money is on the table. You reminded me. In that hospital room, when you held my hand and told me I wasn't alone, you reminded me what it feels like to matter to someone." The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in my chest. This man who commanded billions, who'd built an empire, who'd been on the cover of Forbes. He'd been as lonely as I was, maybe lonelier. At least I'd had my mother, even if I'd lost her. Julian had built his entire life around success and discovered too late that success couldn't hold your hand when you were dying. "What happens now?" I asked. "Do we just hide here forever?" "No." Julian turned from the window, and in the pale moonlight filtering through the trees, his face looked haggard, older than his 60-something years. "Now I make some calls, cash in favors from people who still think I'm dead and will be very surprised to hear otherwise. I need to find out who orchestrated the plane crash, who's embezzling from my company, who wants me dead badly enough to kill 5 innocent people to make it look convincing. 5 people died on that plane." I know. The words came out raw. My assistant, Rebecca, she had 2 kids. My pilot, James, was 3 months from retirement. The executives, the woman I barely knew who'd been invited because Melissa thought it would look good. His voice broke. They died because someone wanted me dead and didn't care about collateral damage. That's on me. That's my responsibility to fix. It's not your fault someone tried to kill you. "Isn't it?" Julian's laugh was bitter. "I built a company on ruthless efficiency. I crushed competitors, destroyed careers, made enemies out of anyone who stood in my way. For 20 years, I told myself it was just business, that it was necessary, that they would have done the same to me." He met my eyes. "But actions have consequences, and maybe this is mine. Watching innocent people die because I made too many enemies to count." I stood, closed the distance between us, and did something that surprised both of us. I took his hand. Not as a nurse checking a pulse, not as a caretaker offering comfort, but as one broken person reaching for another. "Then let's make it mean something," I said. "Let's make sure those 5 people didn't die for nothing. Let's find out who did this and make them pay." Julian stared at our joined hands, then up at my face, and something shifted in his expression. "You understand that if we do this, if we go after whoever's behind this, there's no coming back. Your old life is over. Mine definitely is. We'll be running until we either win or die trying." "I know. And you're still willing?" I thought about my empty apartment, my demanding job, my carefully constructed walls that kept everyone at a safe distance. I thought about my mother's last words. "Don't let fear make you small, Emma. Don't disappear just because the world is hard." I'd been disappearing for 2 years, shrinking myself down until I was nothing but function and routine. Maybe it was time to be something else. I'm still willing, I said. Julian squeezed my hand once, then released it and moved to a cabinet in the corner. He pulled out a laptop so old it had to boot up twice, a burner phone still in its packaging, and a lockbox that contained at least $50,000 in cash. First rule of disappearing, he said, catching my shocked expression. Always have an exit strategy. Always have resources. And never, ever trust that your empire will protect you when it falls. We spent the rest of the night planning. Julian made calls to contacts I couldn't identify, speaking in code that suggested these were relationships forged in gray areas and sealed with mutual secrets. I listened, learning the language of the wealthy and desperate, understanding for the first time how power really worked, not through boards and contracts, but through whispered promises and strategic betrayals. By dawn, we had names. 3 people with motive, means, and opportunity. Marcus Chen, Julian's CFO, who'd been with the company for 15 years and had access to everything. Melissa Cross, the wife who'd inherit billions if Julian was really dead. And David Thornton, a rival CEO who'd been trying to acquire Cross Industries for years and had recently made an offer Julian had publicly humiliated him for making. 3 suspects, 1 truth, and 2 fugitives who had everything to lose and nothing left but each other. We started with Marcus Chen because following the money is always the smart play. Julian's CFO had been with Cross Industries since the beginning, had survived 3 corporate restructurings and countless executive purges, had positioned himself as indispensable. Which, Julian explained as we drove toward Boston in the gray Ford sedan, was exactly the profile of someone who could embezzle hundreds of millions without raising red flags. Marcus is brilliant, Julian said, navigating back roads to avoid highway cameras. MIT graduate, worked at Goldman before I recruited him. He knows every loophole, every accounting trick, every way to make money disappear and reappear somewhere else. If anyone could siphon off 9 figures and make it look like legitimate business expenses, it's him. You think he killed you for it? To cover up embezzlement? I think I confronted him 2 weeks before the plane crash, told him I'd found discrepancies in the overseas accounts, that I was bringing in an independent auditor. Julian's jaw tightened. He looked me in the eye and swore he'd figure out what happened. 3 days later, I got the warning about the plane. We parked 3 blocks from Marcus's brownstone in Beacon Hill, watching his home through binoculars Julian had pulled from the cabin's emergency supplies. The neighborhood was old money and careful privacy, the kind of place where people minded their own business and security cameras were discreetly positioned. Marcus left his house at 7:30 a.m., exactly on schedule according to Julian. He was younger than I'd expected, early 40s, Asian American, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He walked with the confidence of someone who believed he'd gotten away with murder, climbed into a Tesla, and drove toward the financial district. Now what? I asked. Now we break in and find proof. Breaking into Marcus Chen's house was easier than it should have been. Julian had a key. I have keys to all my executives' homes, he'd explained with zero shame. Trust, but verify. The security system was more complicated, but Julian knew the code. Apparently, surveillance went both ways in the corporate world. Inside, the brownstone was meticulously decorated in that soulless way that screamed interior designer rather than personal taste. Everything matched. Nothing felt lived in. We moved quickly through the first floor, Julian heading for the home office, while I stood watch by the window, heart hammering, certain that any moment police would arrive, or Marcus would return, or the whole thing would collapse into disaster. Emma, Julian's voice from the office was tight, you need to see this. The home office was lined with filing cabinets and dominated by a desk with 3 monitors. Julian had one of the monitors awake, displaying financial spreadsheets that meant nothing to me, but clearly meant everything to him. He's been stealing for 7 years, Julian said, scrolling through screens of numbers. Not hundreds of millions, billions, plural, routed through shell corporations in the Caymans, Luxembourg, Singapore. The auditing firm I hired wouldn't have found this in 6 months of looking. It's that well hidden. So he did it. He tried to kill you? Maybe. Julian kept scrolling, his expression darkening. But look at the dates. The major transfers all happened within 48 hours of each other 3 months ago. Before that, it's small amounts, thousands here and there, not enough to notice. Then suddenly, in one weekend, $2.3 billion moves through these accounts. Someone told him to take it, I said, understanding dawning. Someone with enough leverage to make him do it all at once. Or someone set him up. Julian pulled out his phone, the burner, not traceable, and started taking pictures of the screen. Marcus is smart, but he's not this smart. This required coordination across multiple jurisdictions, multiple banks, multiple legal entities. This required resources he doesn't have. A sound from downstairs froze us both, the front door opening, footsteps in the hallway. Julian and I looked at each other, pure panic passing between us. Marcus wasn't supposed to be home. He was supposed to be at the office for the next 8 hours. But the footsteps were climbing the stairs, heading directly for the office, and we had nowhere to hide. Julian moved fast, pulling me behind the door just as it opened. Marcus walked in, phone pressed to his ear, voice tight with stress. "I told you I can't do anything about it," he was saying. "The SEC is already asking questions. If I move any more money now, they'll—" He stopped mid-sentence. From my position behind the door, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but I heard his sharp intake of breath. "I'll call you back." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice deadly calm. "Julian, you're supposed to be dead." Julian stepped out from behind the door, and I followed, feeling exposed and terrified. Marcus stood frozen by his desk, phone still in his hand, face pale beneath his tan. "Disappointing you, as usual," Julian said dryly. "How—" Marcus's eyes darted between us, calculating. "The plane crash. Everyone saw the bodies. The DNA was falsified. Apparently, I have friends even I didn't know about." Julian gestured at the computer screen. "Want to explain what I'm looking at?" "I can explain." Marcus's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "But not here. Not now. There are listening devices in this house, cameras. Everything is monitored." "By whom?" "By the people who will kill all 3 of us if they know you're alive." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Julian and Marcus stared at each other, years of partnership and betrayal stretching between them. "You tried to warn me," Julian said slowly, realization dawning. "The message before the plane crash. That was you." Marcus nodded once. "I couldn't stop them. Could barely get you the warning. They have my daughter, Julian. My 8-year-old daughter. They took her from her school 3 months ago, and they've been holding her somewhere I can't find. Every time I tried to contact the police, to reach out to anyone, they sent me a video of her crying and asked if I wanted to test their patience." His voice cracked. "So, I did what they told me. I moved the money, I kept my mouth shut, and when they said you had to die, I found a way to at least give you a chance." The room spun slightly. This wasn't a simple embezzlement scheme or a corporate power play. This was something darker, more organized, more dangerous than either of us had imagined. "Who are they?" I asked, finding my voice. Marcus looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "Who the hell are you?" "The nurse who saved his life," Julian said, "and our best chance of getting out of this alive. Now answer her question. Who are they?" Marcus pulled up another file on his computer, this one showing a corporate structure chart. At the top was a company name I didn't recognize, Meridian Global Holdings. Below it, a web of subsidiaries, shell corporations, and offshore accounts that connected to dozens of legitimate businesses. "They're everyone," Marcus said simply, "and they're no one. Meridian controls pieces of everything: tech companies, pharmaceutical firms, defense contractors, media corporations. They don't own enough of anything to be noticeable, but they own just enough to have influence. And 3 months ago, they decided Cross Industries was their next acquisition target. And I said no, Julian finished. You laughed in their face, called their representative a two-bit hustler trying to play in the big leagues. Marcus smiled without humor. That was a mistake. Meridian doesn't take no for an answer. They take what they want. And if you won't sell, they find another way. They kill you and force the company into crisis so they can buy it for pennies. Exactly. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went white. We need to leave. Now. They know someone's in the house who shouldn't be. We ran. We made it 2 blocks before the black SUVs appeared. 3 of them, boxing us in from different directions with the precision of a military operation. Julian slammed on the brakes, throwing the sedan into reverse, but another SUV materialized behind us. We were trapped in the middle of a Beacon Hill side street at 8 a.m., surrounded and completely outmaneuvered. Out of the car, Julian ordered. Run. We scattered, Julian going left, Marcus right, me straight ahead between 2 brownstones. I heard car doors slamming, shouts, the sound of footsteps pounding pavement behind me. My scrubs, I'd never changed out of my scrubs, made me instantly identifiable, and I was slower than I should have been, exhaustion and fear making my legs heavy. A hand grabbed my arm. I screamed, twisted, saw a man in a dark suit with an earpiece and dead eyes reaching for me. Training kicked in. I'd taken self-defense classes after a patient's family member had attacked a nurse on my floor. I stomped on his instep, drove my elbow into his solar plexus, and when he doubled over, I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life. I burst onto Charles Street, into morning traffic and pedestrians walking dogs and people carrying coffee like it was a normal Tuesday. I wanted to scream at them, to warn them, to make them see that danger was right here in their safe neighborhood. But I just kept running, weaving between cars, ignoring horns and shouts, my only thought, getting away, surviving, finding Julian. I ducked into a coffee shop, pushed through the crowd and went straight to the bathroom, locked the door, leaned against it, gasping, my heart trying to escape my chest. My phone, my real phone, not a burner, was in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands and saw 17 missed calls. From Karen, from hospital administration, from numbers I didn't recognize. 1 voicemail. I pressed play. Emma Chen, this is Detective Sarah Morrison with Boston PD. We need to speak with you regarding your involvement in the disappearance of a patient from Mercy General Hospital. You are not under arrest at this time, but we strongly advise you to contact us immediately. Failure to do so will result in a warrant being issued for your arrest on charges of obstruction of justice and possible kidnapping. Kidnapping? They thought I'd kidnapped Julian. Or worse, they were being told to think that by people who wanted both of us silenced. Someone pounded on the bathroom door. "Occupied!" I shouted, my voice higher than I intended. "Emma!" Julian's voice, low and urgent. "It's me. Open the door." I did, and he pushed inside, Marcus right behind him. We 3 stood crammed in the tiny bathroom of a Beacon Hill coffee shop, all of us breathing hard, all of us knowing we just crossed a line we couldn't uncross. "They have roadblocks up," Marcus said, checking his phone. "Police, private security, probably FBI by now. Every major route out of the city is covered." "Then we don't leave the city," Julian said. "We hide in plain sight. Emma, give me your phone." I handed it over. Julian dropped it in the toilet and flushed. "They've been tracking you through that, probably listening to every conversation." He looked at Marcus. "Yours too." Marcus hesitated, then pulled out an iPhone and handed it to Julian, who dropped it in after mine. 2 expensive phones swirling away, taking with them our last connections to our old lives. "I have a place," Julian said. "South End. Apartment under a shell company that even Meridian won't think to check. We go there, regroup, figure out our next move." "Our next move should be contacting the FBI," I said. "Tell them everything. Meridian, the kidnapping, the plane crash." "The FBI won't help." Marcus's voice was flat. "Meridian has people everywhere. Local police, federal agents, judges. You go to the authorities, you're dead within 48 hours, and it'll look like suicide or a drug overdose or an accident that no one questions. My daughter, Marcus continued, his voice breaking, has been missing for 3 months. I've called every contact I have, pulled every string, offered every bribe. Nothing. No leads, no ransom demands beyond do what we say, no proof she's even alive except the videos they send every week. He pulled out a different phone, apparently he had backups, and showed us a video. A little girl with Marcus's eyes and her mother's smile, sitting in a white room with no windows, reading a book. She looked thin but unharmed, wearing pajamas that looked clean. The video was dated yesterday. They're keeping her comfortable, Marcus said, for now. As long as I cooperate. As long as I do exactly what they tell me. He looked at Julian. I'm sorry, for all of it. But I can't help you if it means losing her. I know, Julian's voice was gentle. And I'm not asking you to. But I need you to trust me one more time. Can you do that? Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. We made it to the South End apartment through a combination of luck and Julian's paranoid preparation. He'd planned for this scenario, the complete collapse of his empire, the total loss of power and protection. The apartment was in a converted warehouse, 5th floor, accessible through a service entrance that required 3 different keys. Inside, it was small but functional. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchenette, and a living space dominated by a wall of monitors and computer equipment that looked like something from a spy movie. Welcome to my panic room, Julian said without humor. I've been preparing for corporate espionage and hostile takeovers for 15 years. Never thought I'd be hiding from assassination, but the infrastructure works either way. He booted up the computers, no waiting, these were professional grade, and started pulling up files. Financial records, personnel files, security footage from Cross Industries headquarters. Everything he'd need to prove Meridian's conspiracy, if we could figure out how to use it without getting killed. Marcus sank onto the couch, looking older than his 40 years, and pulled up the phone with his daughter's video. He watched it again and again, like he was memorizing every detail of her face in case it was the last time he saw her. I sat down beside him, not knowing what to say. What's her name? Sophie? His voice was barely a whisper. She loves horses and Harry Potter, wants to be a veterinarian, reads at a 9th grade level even though she's only in 3rd grade. He looked at me, his eyes red. I was supposed to protect her. That's what fathers do, and I failed. You didn't fail, I said firmly. You made impossible choices to keep her alive. That's not failure, that's love. From across the room, Julian was watching us, his expression unreadable. Marcus, the accounts you moved the money to, can you access them? Theoretically. Not theoretically. Can you or can't you? Marcus hesitated. Yes, but the moment I do, Meridian will know. Good. Julian's smile was cold. I want them to know. I want them to understand that we're not hiding anymore. We're coming for them. That's suicide, I said. No. Julian turned to face me fully. Hiding is suicide. They'll find us eventually. Hunt us down, eliminate the evidence, and move on to their next acquisition. But if we go on the offensive, if we expose them publicly, if we make ourselves too loud to quietly eliminate, then maybe we have a chance. A chance at what? Getting all of us killed faster? A chance at saving Sophie. Julian looked at Marcus. A chance at stopping them from doing this to the next company, the next executive, the next 8-year-old girl they decide to use as leverage. A chance at making the 5 people who died on that plane matter for something more than covering up corporate greed. The room was silent, except for the hum of the computers. Then Marcus stood, walked to Julian, and held out his hand. Tell me what you need, he said. Julian shook his hand, sealing whatever suicide pact they were making, and I realized with crystal clarity that I was going to follow them into it. Because somewhere along the way, between room 347 and this moment, these people had become more than a patient and a stranger. They'd become the only family I had left. "We're going to need a reporter," Julian said. "Someone with credibility, independence, and a death wish. Someone who won't back down when Meridian comes after them." "I know someone," I heard myself say. They both turned to look at me. My college roommate, Allison Garcia, investigative reporter for the Boston Globe. She's been trying to crack a story about corporate corruption for years. She'll help us. And she won't back down. Not if she smells a real story. Julian nodded slowly. "Make the call." I pulled out the burner phone Julian had given me earlier and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. After 3 rings, Allison answered. "This is Garcia." "Allison, it's Emma Chen. I need your help. And before you ask, yes, it's illegal. Yes, it's dangerous. And yes, it's the biggest story of your career." A pause. Then, "I'm listening." Allison Garcia arrived at the South End apartment 3 hours later with a laptop bag, a digital recorder, and the kind of sharp-eyed intensity that had made her the youngest reporter ever nominated for a Pulitzer at the Globe. She looked exactly the same as she had in college. Petite, Latina, with black hair pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail and eyes that saw through bullshit like it was transparent. She took one look at the 3 of us, exhausted, terrified, clearly on the run, and said, "Somebody better start talking. And Emma, you better have a damn good reason for ghosting me for 2 years before calling out of nowhere with some cryptic message about corporate conspiracy." So, we told her everything. Julian's faked death, the plane crash that killed 5 people, Marcus's embezzlement under duress, Sophie's kidnapping, Meridian Global's shadow empire, the black SUVs and the FBI corruption, and the slow realization that we were fighting something bigger than one company or one conspiracy. We were fighting a system that had learned how to operate in the spaces between laws, in the gray areas where money and power made morality negotiable. Allison listening without interrupting, taking notes in shorthand, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When we finished, she sat back and said, "You understand, this is impossible to prove. You have financial records that could be falsified, a kidnapping with no ransom note, no official report, no evidence except videos that could be staged, a plane crash that every official investigation has closed, and your main source is a man the entire world thinks is dead." "So you won't help us," Marcus said flatly. "I didn't say that." Allison's smile was sharp. "I said it's impossible. I didn't say I wasn't going to try anyway." She turned to Julian. "I'll need access to everything. Every file, every email, every piece of evidence you have. And I'll need you to go on record. Face on camera, full name, willing to testify in court if it comes to that." "If I go public before we have enough evidence, Meridian will kill Sophie," Marcus interjected. "Not if we publish fast enough." Allison was already pulling out her laptop. "We drop the story and all the evidence simultaneously. Online, print, every news outlet I can feed it to. Make it too big to cover up, too public to deny. Force their hand before they can retaliate." "That's a gamble," I said. "Everything is a gamble at this point." Allison looked at me, and something soft entered her expression. "I'm sorry about your mom, Em. I should have been there. I should have called, visited, something. I was so focused on my career that I lost track of the people who mattered." The apology hit harder than I expected. I'd been angry at Allison for her absence, for the way she drifted away when my life got hard. But sitting here now, planning to expose a corporate conspiracy that could get us all killed, I understood. Sometimes survival means pulling back. Sometimes it means pushing forward. And sometimes you get lucky enough to have a second chance. "Help us now," I said. "That's enough." We worked through the night, Allison crafting the story while Julian and Marcus pulled together evidence. Financial records showing $2.3 billion in transfers. Emails between Meridian representatives and Cross Industries board members discussing necessary transitions. Security footage from the airport showing Julian getting into a car 3 hours before his scheduled flight. Proof he was never on that plane. And most damning, a spreadsheet Marcus had hidden in an encrypted file showing every company Meridian had acquired in the last 10 years and the suspicious deaths or disappearances of executives who'd refused to sell. 17 names. 17 people who'd said no to Meridian and ended up dead, missing, or broken. "This is bigger than Cross Industries," Allison said, staring at the list. Jesus, this is organized crime operating as corporate strategy." "This is how empires are really built," Julian said quietly. "The Forbes articles never mention the bodies." At 3 a.m., Allison finished the first draft. She read it aloud to us, and I heard my own story woven into the narrative. The nurse who saved a billionaire's life and discovered a conspiracy. It sounded impossible even hearing it spoken. Like fiction, like something that couldn't happen in the real world. But it had happened. It was happening, and in a few hours, the whole world would know. "Before we publish," Marcus said, his voice tight, "I need to try one more thing." He pulled out his phone, a fourth burner apparently, and dialed a number. "This is a secure line to someone at Meridian, someone I've been communicating with about Sophie. I'm going to tell them I have copies of everything, that if anything happens to her, if anything happens to any of us, it all goes public automatically." "That's a bluff," Julian said. "We don't have a dead man's switch set up." "They don't know that." Marcus's hand was shaking as he held the phone. "And maybe, just maybe, they'll decide she's more valuable as a bargaining chip than as leverage." The call connected. Marcus put it on speaker. "Mr. Chen." The voice was smooth, professional, completely devoid of emotion. "It's late. This must be important." "I have everything," Marcus said. "Every file, every transaction, every piece of evidence proving what Meridian has done. And I have Julian Cross, alive and willing to testify. If my daughter isn't returned safely within 24 hours, it all goes public. Every news outlet, every federal agency, every international investigative body. You'll be exposed, and you'll lose everything." Silence. Then, "You're bluffing. If you had that kind of leverage, you'd have used it months ago." "I didn't have Julian Cross alive months ago. I do now." Marcus's voice was steady, but tears were streaming down his face. "I don't want to be your enemy. I just want my daughter back. Make this trade. Sophie for our silence. Everyone walks away." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the calculation happening on the other end. Cost-benefit analysis, risk assessment, the cold math of corporate strategy applied to human lives. "We'll be in touch," the voice said finally. "Don't do anything stupid in the meantime." The line went dead. Marcus collapsed onto the couch, phone falling from his hand. "I don't know if that worked. I don't know if they'll—" "You did the right thing," Julian said, sitting beside him. "You gave her a chance. That's all any of us can do." We waited. Hours crawled by with agonizing slowness, all of us watching our phones, jumping at every sound. Allison uploaded the story to the Globe server, ready to publish at a moment's notice. I made coffee that no one drank and stared out the window at the city waking up, wondering if this would be our last sunrise. At 6 a.m., Marcus's phone rang. He answered on speaker, hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. "Yes? There's a park 3 blocks from your current location, Clarendon Street Playground. Your daughter will be there in 30 minutes. Come alone, unarmed, and no police. If we see anyone else, the deal is off and you'll never see her again." "How do I know she'll really be there? How do I know this isn't a trap?" "You don't," the voice was almost amused. "But you'll go anyway, won't you? Because she's your daughter, and parents are predictable that way." The line disconnected. "It's a trap," I said immediately. "They're going to kill you the moment you show up." "Probably," Marcus agreed. He was already standing, putting on his jacket. "But if there's even a 1% chance Sophie is really there, I have to take it." "Then we're coming with you," Julian said. They said alone. Screw what they said. Julian's voice was hard. We're not letting you walk into an ambush by yourself. Emma, you stay here with Allison. If we're not back in an hour, publish everything. Absolutely not, I said. If you two are doing something stupid and suicidal, I'm doing it with you. Allison can publish the story. Allison looked at all three of us like we were insane. Which, to be fair, we probably were. You realize this is exactly what they want, to get you all in one place where they can eliminate the problem completely. Yes, Julian said simply, but we're out of good options. We only have bad ones and worse ones, so we're choosing the bad one, where we fight back. We walked to Clarendon Street Playground together, Julian, Marcus, and me, leaving Allison at the apartment with instructions to publish in exactly 60 minutes. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of perfect Boston spring day that makes you forget winter ever existed. Parents were already arriving with their children, pushing them on swings, watching them climb on jungle gyms, living ordinary lives that didn't include corporate conspiracies and kidnapped children. We saw her immediately. Sophie Chen, sitting alone on a bench at the far end of the playground, wearing the same pajamas from the video, looking small and scared and so unbearably fragile that my chest physically hurt. Marcus made a sound, half sob, half prayer, and started running. Wait, Julian grabbed his arm. Look around. Where are the handlers? Where are the SUVs? He was right. The playground was full of families, but there was no sign of Meridian security forces. No black vehicles, no men with earpieces, just normal people on a normal morning. Maybe they really let her go, I said, not believing it even as I spoke. Marcus pulled free and ran to his daughter. I watched him scoop her up, watched her wrap her arms around his neck and bury her face in his shoulder. Watched him cry as he held her, swaying slightly, whispering things I couldn't hear but could feel in my bones. That's when I saw them. Not security forces, worse. FBI agents, at least a dozen, surrounding the playground from every direction. And leading them was Detective Morrison, the one who'd left me the voicemail about kidnapping charges. Julian Cross, she called out, her voice carrying across the playground. You're under arrest for fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Emma Chen, Marcus Chen, you're also under arrest as accomplices. Julian grabbed my hand, squeezed once. Whatever happens now, he said quietly. Thank you for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible, for caring when you had every reason not to, for reminding me what it means to be human. We're not done, I told him, squeezing back. Allison will publish the story. The truth will come out. Maybe, he smiled, sad and resigned. Or maybe Meridian owns the FBI too, and this is how it ends. But at least we tried. At least we fought back. The agents were closing in, weapons drawn, shouting orders to get on the ground. Families were screaming, grabbing their children, running from the playground. Sophie was crying, clinging to her father, and Marcus was trying to shield her while also raising his hands in surrender. I thought about my mother in her hospital bed. Thought about how she'd spent her last months fighting a battle she couldn't win, but fought anyway because the alternative was giving up. Thought about how she'd told me not to disappear, not to let fear make me small. I raised my hands, dropped to my knees, felt the cold pavement bite through my scrubs as agents swarmed around us, forcing us down, reading us our rights in voices that sounded like they were coming from underwater. But even as they handcuffed me, even as they hauled us to our feet and started marching us toward waiting vehicles, I heard it. The notification sounds. Dozens of them, coming from phones all around the playground. News alerts. Breaking story. Boston Globe exclusive. Billionaire fakes death to expose corporate conspiracy. How Meridian Global built an empire on blackmail, murder, and stolen billions. By Allison Garcia. I looked at Julian and saw him smile. Really smile, for the first time since I'd met him. The only way out is through, he said. And just like that, the world changed. The trial lasted 8 months. Meridian Global's lawyers were vicious, relentless, and expensive. But Allison's story had gone viral, picked up by every major news outlet, investigated by 3 different federal agencies, and sparked a movement of whistleblowers from other companies coming forward with their own stories of Meridian's tactics. Sophie's testimony about her captivity, delivered in closed session to protect her identity, broke the case open. Forensic accountants traced every dollar Marcus had moved, proving it was done under duress. The fake plane crash unraveled when investigators found the body they'd identified as Julian Cross was actually a homeless man who'd been paid to match Julian's dental records and DNA. Someone had murdered him to make Julian's death convincing. That detail, more than anything else, showed the depths of Meridian's ruthlessness. Marcus was granted immunity in exchange for his testimony. The charges against me were dropped when it became clear I'd had no idea who Julian was when I saved him. I lost my nursing license anyway. The board decided helping a patient escape custody violated ethical standards, even if that patient's life was in danger. I didn't care. I'd stopped being a nurse the moment I'd walked out of Mercy General with Julian. I'd become something else, something fiercer, something that couldn't be contained by hospital walls and shift schedules. Julian was convicted of fraud for faking his death and the insurance implications, and sentenced to 3 years, serving 18 months before being paroled. The embezzlement charges didn't stick. Neither did the conspiracy charges. Turned out, when you're the victim of a corporate assassination attempt, the jury is sympathetic. Meridian Global collapsed under the weight of the investigation. 17 executives were indicted, 8 went to trial, 5 are currently serving federal prison sentences. The rest took plea deals and disappeared into witness protection or exile. Cross Industries was dissolved, its assets liquidated to pay restitution to victims of Meridian's schemes. Julian walked away with nothing, no empire, no billions, no Forbes covers. Just his life, which apparently was more valuable than he'd realized. We testified in court that we were just nurse and patient, nothing more, professional relationship only. We lied. 6 months after Julian was released from prison, he showed up at my apartment with Chinese takeout and a job offer. He was starting a consulting firm helping companies implement ethical business practices and protect themselves from hostile takeovers. He needed someone who understood crisis management, who could stay calm under pressure, who'd proven they could make impossible decisions when everything was falling apart. He needed me. The pay is terrible, he'd said, standing in my doorway, looking more alive than he ever had on the cover of Forbes. The hours are worse and will probably fail within a year. But if we succeed, if we can help even one company avoid what happened to us, maybe the 5 people who died on that plane won't have died for nothing. When do I start? I'd asked. That was 3 years ago. Now I'm standing in a small office in Cambridge, watching Julian prep for a presentation to a tech startup that's being pressured to sell. Marcus is our CFO. He and Sophie moved to Boston after the trial, and she's thriving in therapy and 6th grade. Allison won her Pulitzer and occasionally consults with us on cases that need media attention. And me? I'm not a nurse anymore, but I still save lives, just in different ways. My phone buzzes, a text from Julian. Coffee before the meeting? There's something I want to ask you. I smile, grab my jacket, and head out. The morning is cold and clear, just like that day at the playground 3 years ago. But everything is different now. Everything is better. Because we fought back, because we refused to disappear, because we chose the hard path and walked it together. My mother was right. Don't let fear make you small. Don't disappear just because the world is hard. Live. Fight. Matter. That's the only way through. If this story reminded you that one person can make a difference, that caring about someone, really caring, can change everything, hit that like button. If you've ever felt invisible, like you were just going through the motions, like you needed proof that your choices matter, drop a comment. Tell me about a time you chose the hard thing over the easy thing. Tell me about someone you saved, or someone who saved you. and subscribe, because there are more stories like this. More people who fought back when the world said to give up. More moments where ordinary people became extraordinary just by refusing to disappear. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Thank you for caring about Emma and Julian and Marcus and Sophie. Thank you for believing that sometimes the only way out really is through. Now go out there and be someone's reason to keep fighting. Be someone's proof that people still care. I'll see you in the next story.